Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Nick Kurth, the manager for the Justice System Improvement Program, and I'm going to allow a couple more minutes here before we get started so that we can have additional participants joining. Looks like we're up to about 80 and expecting that number may rise a bit more here, so please be patient and we'll give others a chance to join, and then I'll get the meeting underway. All right, well, it looks like number of participants has started to level off. I'm sure some others will trickle in, but let's go ahead and get started tonight. Again, I am Nick Kurth, Justice System Improvement Program Manager. Tonight, we're going to lead with a presentation that'll last about 30 minutes. And then I will turn it over to our County Administrator, Joe Kirby, who will field your questions and pose them to our panelists. And we plan to wrap up at 7 o'clock tonight. So that's the overview. Number of ground rules. Virtual meetings are always tricky. Wish we could all just walk in a room and talk to each other, but that isn't possible to do safely right now. So bear with me here while I go through a few things that'll hopefully make this a productive meeting for all. First off, please keep your comments professional and no profanity. The chat and Q&A functions are part of the public record, so keep that in mind. Tonight, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen as much as possible to log questions and chat. I know that may be a departure from some previous meetings, but we're going to try and use Q&A as much as possible. That will help the folks behind the scenes kind of work through the questions, has some functionality that chat does not. So again, use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Additionally, if instructions are needed, we'll post those in the chat. So trying to keep those separate from the Q&A. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible tonight. However, if we're unable to get to your question, please send me an email. My information is at the end of the presentation, and also it'll be posted in the chat, or to commissioner or commissioners of your choice. The focus tonight is really on both the proposed west and north suburban sites. But I will say the county would really enjoy hearing sentiments from folks relative to the north site. We haven't had as much opportunity to share the north site, not nearly as broadly as we've talked about the west and the south sites. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists, and then I will dive into the presentation. First, our commissioners, Nancy Weiss, our chair this year, Zan Ojero, and Pat Malone. District Attorney John Haroldson is with us. Sheriff Jeff Van Arsdale, who is also a co-executive sponsor of JSIP, along with Joe Kirby, our county administrator. So both Jeff and Joe are here tonight. In addition, we have Deputy Director of Behavioral Health, Danielle Brown, our Juvenile Department Director, Matt Weatherall, and Mitch Hine, who is an architect joining us from DLR Group. DLR Group is our PreDesign consultant and the phase of the program that we're in right now. And of course, I am one of the panelists. So that pretty much covers all of the instructions. And with that, let's begin. So first and foremost, I want to kind of stress what an incredibly long timeline this program is on. We're about halfway through it, 5 years into it, with about 5 more years to go. So in all, we'll span almost a decade from conception and our assessment until doors open. The current phase is pre-design, and pre-design is really all about testing site-specific conceptual designs and testing those with the public. We've spent about 20 months now on site selection. It has really been kind of a cornerstone activity of pre-design. Along the way, we've had several months of public outreach. This is our third large public meeting, but we've had something like 27 or 28 smaller meetings and focus groups. In addition, we formed a technical and a community advisory committee that met for about a year as we were forming these concepts that I will be sharing with you tonight. Ultimately, we're going to arrive at a funding plan, and which is really all about the bond measure elements, and then have a bond measure in May of 2023. Bond measure passes, we will move into design and engineering with doors open roughly in the 2025 to 27 time period. Our vision is pretty straightforward, but not simple in its means. From the assessment that we conducted initially, the county really arrived based on input from the community, based on input from consultants, at a vision where we had a balance of treatment and accountability in our justice system. And, you know, I want to acknowledge that there's really gaps on both sides of that vision, both treatment and accountability. We have gaps in our system today. Reaching a balance really isn't about who gets the most dollars or most staff or most square footage. It's about outcomes. And so we're trying to find the right balance of outcomes for a justice system. The vision is really a big departure from past ballot measures related to our justice system. Previously, we've been wholly focused on accountability, essentially a new jail. So this is really taking a step back, looking at our justice system holistically, and finding a vision that resonates with the community. Ultimately, we want to build an equitable, effective, and safe justice system. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those equitability components as part of the presentation. So in terms of new facilities and what and whys, both have a pretty long list. You know, at the heart of the program are a crisis center, new county courthouse, correctional facility, and sheriff's office and emergency operations. You know, we know that currently we don't have a crisis center, and you'll see there's a check mark next to that. We're actually advancing the crisis center with funding both internally and from state and federal sources. We haven't completed that funding source, but we have momentum and are moving forward with the crisis center. Similarly, commissioners recently decided to move forward with the new county courthouse. Our historic courthouse is a wonderful icon in the community, entering its 134th year. Has many issues, but you know, certainly foremost is safety, relative to having, good best practices separation between victims and accused. The historic courthouse was not designed with ADA in mind. It was not designed to modern seismic standards, and wasn't even designed really to be reconfigured. And so new courthouse is the answer in terms of solving many of those challenges. Our correctional facility is entering its 46th year, really very small by any measure, any standard, given the size of our county, 40 beds. It was originally built as a temporary facility. We effectively have so little room there that all we can do is warehouse adults in custody. We're not able to even have room to provide programs that we'd like, rehabilitative programs. And our solution to having so few beds locally is to rent beds out of county. That does not align with best practices. In fact, it kind of works against ourselves in terms of reaching some of our objectives, especially when it comes to recidivism and closing the revolving door of jail. In addition, kind of as a result of having so little space, we routinely release offenders. We use cite and release 2 to 3 times what is normative. On the flip side, our failure to appear rate in court is 2 to 3 times what is considered best practices. So essentially, we're citing offenders, hoping they show up in court. Often they don't, and this cycle just continues to repeat itself. Our incarceration rate when the assessment was being conducted by a couple of consultants, one called CGL, they noted that our incarceration rate is not just the lowest in Oregon, it's the lowest they've ever seen in the country. And kind of companion to that, we now have, I think, the 6th highest crime rate in the Oregon counties. So the metrics seem to say things aren't exactly working as well as we would like. This is probably one of my favorite slides, and I like to emphasize that there's a lot of conversation now, a lot of focus on facilities, but the Justice System Improvement Program is not limited to facilities. It's really about programs and facilities, and that kind of speaks to that balance that I was talking about. We're making a lot of investments on kind of the left side of this screen here. And so I'd like people to keep that in mind. I won't go through all of these, but I do want to point out a couple in-custody treatment programs, things like GED prep, anger management classes, parenting classes. These are things we would like to offer in our correctional facility, which really is currently just a jail, a place where we warehouse people. We would like to operate a true correctional facility and have these in-custody treatment programs. We're already talking about what we would like to offer, figuring out how we're going to pay for them. Yes, these things won't happen for several years, but we'd like to be prepared. As well, data evaluation and metrics. That's really a cornerstone of this program. We invited Greater Oregon Behavioral Health back to help us with data evaluation and metrics. They were involved initially in the assessment. They are ideally suited to help us with data evaluation and providing more transparency, but also giving us metrics by which we can measure our success and have continual improvement in our system. So really happy to have them back on board. In terms of funding, it's a very complicated picture. The numbers are large across all of the facilities that are under consideration. I'd like to point out that the county is being very active and very aggressive, I would say, in pursuing other funding sources to bring down the cost of the bond measure. Certainly our target is to keep the bond measure below $100 million. Hasn't been determined, how far below yet. That's an activity that will come later this year. But to date, we've secured roughly $23.25 million in fundings for crisis center, new courthouse, sheriff and emergency operations. And additionally, we are currently pursuing another $15.75 million for some of those same facilities where we are encountering larger expenses, building costs than we anticipated. But again, making every effort that we can to pursue funding opportunities. So now coming a little closer to, I gave you the big picture timeline, which was a decade. I'd like to share with you some recent key milestones that we passed and still have in front of ourselves. So as many of you may know, we had a site in South Corvallis down by Tiger Island Road, and that was dismissed from current consideration in late November. The commissioners subsequently made two really important decisions relative to JSIP, and if you haven't already picked up on this, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of dependencies, and the decisions in early mid-December were very important. First, it was to advance the new county courthouse, and the reason for that is that we have a 50% match from the state, $20 million towards a new county courthouse. Because we ultimately ended up pushing out our bond measure, we had to decide either to move forward and fund our match through reserves and borrowing, or essentially to wait for the outcome of the bond measure, go back to the legislature and get that $20 million reapproved if we could. The commissioners decided that they wanted to move forward now, and knowing that we have those matching funds secured, not leave that to fate of the future. Similarly, commissioners indicated that they favor co-locating the district attorney's offices with the new courthouse. We have not yet identified funding for that piece of the project, but we're working on it and we'll continue to work on it. Ultimately, we'd like to have the DA part of the new courthouse. Next decision was just made a couple of weeks ago, had to do with location of the courthouse. And so a primary topic of discussion over the past year with both the technical advisory and community advisory committees was the notion of a justice system campus versus a split system, if you would, or a blended system. And so ultimately, and this has been shared in previous large public meetings, previous presentations where we asked for feedback. Ultimately, the commissioners, after weighing all of the feedback and information, decided they would like to have a justice system campus where we combine the new courthouse, correctional facility, sheriff's office, and emergency operations as well. This past week, we had a preliminary site decision on West and North, and here we are tonight talking about the same. Final decision is anticipated at tomorrow's special BOC meeting. As a reminder, our site selection process, I said earlier, we've been at this for about 20 months. And it began by essentially mapping areas in or near the Corvallis urban growth boundary. That was our first cut. By doing that, we afforded ourselves utilities and proximity to the county seat, essentially. And so that was our top line criteria. We had 40 possible sites, weighed those against 32 factors, narrowed it down to 10 properties, 5 downtown, 5 suburban. Ultimately, after knocking on doors and exploring options with owners, came down to essentially 4 properties, 3 suburban, which would be the west, the south, and the north, and one downtown location, which is not large enough for a justice system campus, but it could have accommodated a new courthouse. Formed a task force, county and city, to explore due diligence items, approved a negotiating team, and then ultimately he's tested these sites against the conceptual designs that we were considering with the public. So this has been the process to date. It's taken a very long time to get to where we are today. In terms of site decision implications, so a decision tomorrow is essentially a binary outcome. If the north is chosen, the west goes the way away. If the west is chosen, knocks the north out of contention. We have an LOI for the west site. If it advances, we will execute a PSA. If the north side is chosen, we must still find a way to acquire the property. The only other option is to abandon both sites, maybe reconsider the south, which had been previously dismissed if it's still available, or start over. And in fact, starting over really is not a great option, because we really there isn't some piece of property that we haven't explored already. And so ultimately it would probably mean looking outside of Corvallis, which is not our objective. So here are the sites, and west site on Reservoir Road, down the street from the fairgrounds, north site next to Hewlett Packard. South site has been dismissed for now with an X over it, and the downtown site really is the home of the crisis center. That's the use that we have for that site. Again, I'd mentioned it could have accommodated a new courthouse, but the commissioner's decision to have a justice system campus really means the courthouse is going to end on either the west or the north site. In terms of the concepts, here you have it. You could have courthouse, correctional facility, sheriff's office, emergency ops on the west side, crisis center downtown. This is a test fit. It is by no means a design. It's just to show that given the usable acreage, could the elements and parking fit on the site with the limitations of wetland and other delineations. And in fact, again, this is a very approximate, so I don't want people to get hung up on how it looks. Same concept is possible on the north site, with all of the kind of top three or larger three justice system facilities on the north campus, with the crisis center downtown on the current Board of Commissioners block. So I wanted to share some of the feedback that we've heard and received relative to the proposed sites, relative to west. Certainly concerns about proximity to a neighborhood on one side, concerns about safety related to the release of adults in custody in the area, impact on property values, impact on site functionality with 53rd Street flooding, general overall impacts on transportation infrastructure. Certainly, the county is aware that that west area has transportation challenges today, and regardless of the proposed JSIP facilities. And then environmental impacts, both inherent to the site and the surroundings. Relative to the north site, again, we've heard much less. We've had less time to share the north site with folks. There was concern about the Willamette River Greenway requirements. Those have been looked at and considered already. We're aware of the setbacks. Aware of the landscaping requirements, but there's nothing there that is, a showstopper relative to development of the north site. There's been kind of anecdotal support relative to for the north site, but really haven't heard it widespread. In terms of how the two sites stack up, I've shared before that the north site has really always been the strongest site. This particular ranking takes a number of factors into consider, factors that are really differentiators relative to the two sites. They do have factors that they share in common, which really don't differentiate them. So I removed those from this particular matrix or spreadsheet. And so you can see just bottom line, north site scored higher than west. I think the other thing that's notable here is cost difference. Cost is substantially different west versus north. I shared earlier, we do not have an LOI on the north site. Currently, two parties are pretty far apart on price. Those dollar amounts up above reflect the county's essentially last best offer that was rejected. So in summary, relative to the two sites, both scored well against our selection criteria. That's why they made the top 5 list. There has been, organized, loud opposition to the west site. Certainly the north site is better suited for an integrated justice system campus. That is our objective. After 7 months of negotiations, relative on the north side, parties are far apart and remain far apart on price. Haven't entered into an LOI. That difference could be as much as 6 times nominally, 3 times per usable acre. Could actually be more. I guess there's one silver lining here relative to the acquisition costs, and that's that we could use up to 40% of that as an offset for our match for the new courthouse. So, we have to put up 50% of the dollars, whatever we pay to acquire a site for the new courthouse. At least the courthouse portion of that can be applied against our match. So we do get some of the value or dollars back from our acquisition cost. In terms of next steps, really, we're here to make a site decision tomorrow. And part of the reason for that is once we decided to move forward with the new courthouse, that's on a timeline that is predicated by the dollars that we're getting from the state. We have to move into design, and we are moving into design, so we need a site. Even maybe more importantly, just for the whole JSIP program timeline to work and lead up to the bond measure in May of 2023 and allow to more public engagement and more information gathering, we need to make a site decision. So we've really pushed it out as far as we can, and now we need to keep moving forward. This is my contact information. And I think it's probably in the chat as well. Also online at that URL for the JSIP program on the Benton County website. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to County Administrator Joe Kirby. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll move into the question and answer portion of the evening. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that handoff. Welcome, everyone. I am Joe Kirby. I am the County Administrator. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, and I really want to extend our gratitude for your engagement in this particular project and for you being here tonight and providing your feedback and your questions. My role tonight will be to take the questions that you've been submitting through the Q&A function and pose those to the panelists that are on the screen in front of you. Nick already introduced the panelists, so I won't take any time to do so. All of the panelists do have their titles next to their name on the screen in case you're wondering who is who. I would like to remind the panelists to leave your video on and to ensure that your mic is turned off unless you are answering a question. Also, panelists, as I am presenting questions to you, if you would like to add on to a question that I've posed to another panelist, feel free to interject once that panelist is finished answering the initial question. Once again, for all of the participants, if you'll make sure to enter your questions into the Q&A function and not the chat function. We do have staff behind the scenes who are taking the questions out of the Q&A and presenting those to me on a screen that I will be reading from. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I do see that there's a question out there about why are we preventing people from being able to see the other participants in this webinar. And I would share with you, we're not trying to prevent you from seeing other participants or their names. If you go down to the participant button on the very bottom center part of the screen, you can click on participants, and then you can click on either the panelists or attendees. If you click on the attendees, you'll be able to see all of the folks that are engaged in the meeting tonight by the name that they have registered under. Nick, before we get started with a lot of detailed questions, you referenced a number of acronyms, one of those being a PSA, another one being an LOI. So before we jump into this in more detail, could you please provide some clarity around what those acronyms are?
My pleasure, Joe, and thank you for pointing that out. Now how it is with acronyms, you start using them and you forget. So an LOI is a letter of intent. It's a non-binding letter, but it is used to, on behalf of two parties who are negotiating, to really help spell out terms of an agreement. And so it's really the first document that you work on when you're trying to, or with a land transaction, a real property transaction. A PSA is a purchase and sale agreement. So once you execute a LOI, it typically spells out kind of the terms and the timeline for entering into a purchase and sale agreement. Sometimes there's a due diligence period, as we wrote into one of our LOI, that allows a prospective buyer to kind of kick the tires and explore issues and concerns relative to a property. At some point, though, you move forward, you enter into a PSA. That's a binding agreement signed by all parties, and that really consummates the real estate transaction. So thank you for that question, Joe.
Great, thanks, Nick, for that clarification. I think I'm going to direct the next question to Commissioner Ozero. And the question is, Commissioner Ozero, why is a site being considered and purchased prior to passing a necessary bond measure?
Thank you. In the ideal world of worlds, it would be nice to be able to do it that way, but there are many, many expenses involved in planning this large public infrastructure complex. And really, we have to have a site in order to know exactly what all of the costs are going to be, and to be able to present to the community both those costs and the full design for what we are asking them to fund. So it's an iterative process. And this is the way we need to do it in order to be able to have all the information that we need for the bond measure and to present to all of you as taxpayers here in the county.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other panelists that would like to share a response to that as well? Nick, we're going to go back to you. This is a question that I have heard a lot about, and it's relative to traffic, and it's specific to the west site. This person is asking about the west side traffic study, which was supposed to be complete at the end of October of 2021. And has that traffic study been completed? And if so, is it available for public access?
Yes, it has been available, and I'm happy to provide it. And I know I received a recent request for it, which I haven't gotten around to mailing out. But yeah, absolutely, it was completed. It was completed after OSU was in session because we wanted to understand, impacts with both OSU and actually community schools in full operation. So happy to get that to anyone who's interested in it.
Nick, are you able to share maybe some summary points of that
Sure.
particular traffic study?
Yes, I will. So first, I want to acknowledge something I said earlier in the presentation. The traffic challenges in the West Corvallis area are well known and understood. I'm aware that the proposed 53rd Street overpass has been a priority for many years, and in fact, Public Works is now studying and preparing for the possibility of infrastructure dollars flowing, from the federal level to potentially help fund that project. So the need is well known. The Justice System campus itself has really very minimal impact, and that's true for wherever it is sited. We've studied both west, south, and north relative to the Justice campus. And in fact, the impact is so minimal, the impact of trip ends is so minimal that not even a turn lane is required on Reservoir Road into the Justice campus. And in comparison on the north site, I think under the most arduous or stressful condition, a left turn lane would have been required, but not on Reservoir Road. So it simply just doesn't have that much movement in and out, and certainly not relative even to the current activities on the west site. There are 4 businesses there that operate, 5 days a week, and so they are creating their own traffic impacts. And the study that we did actually took them into account to look at the relative difference were you to replace the existing businesses with the proposed Justice System facilities.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. We're going to turn to Danielle Brown, our Behavioral Health Deputy Director, and provide a couple of questions to Danielle regarding the Crisis Center. Danielle, if you could explain, first of all, what is a crisis center and why are we not proposing locating it near the hospital?
Yeah, good questions. Our crisis center is designed to support individuals who are experiencing mental health or psychiatric crisis, and engaging with law enforcement or treatment providers, and really need an opportunity for a place to go to be able to stabilize their psychiatric condition. What we're proposing is to provide both short-term treatment and links to ongoing treatment for individuals who get engaged at the crisis center. We'll have a combination of what we're calling short-term chairs, so people that can be there from anywhere from 1 to just a handful of hours, and some longer-term beds for people that may need a little bit longer time to stabilize, up to 30 days. We're really hoping this will fill a significant gap in the community for services that don't currently exist. Right now, we only have the inpatient acute care facility at Good Samaritan, and that is consistently full in the 16 beds that they have available. So this will provide additional support resources for our community members who are experiencing psychiatric crisis. In terms of the location, we did a fair amount of research to find space that would fit the crisis center. The decision was made not to co-locate it next to the hospital or near the hospital. We wanted it to be a separate location, and we wanted it to be accessible for people who are more than likely going to be accessing the facility. So having it located downtown where there are social service supports, closer to treatment supports, really made the most sense in terms of accessibility for the program for the people that are going to be in need of it the most.
Thank you, Danielle. Along the lines of the Crisis Center, I would like to pose a question to both you, Danielle, as well as to you, Sheriff Van Arsdal. And that particular question relates to, if we have a crisis center that is operational, will that reduce the number of adults in custody within our correctional facility? So can you speak to the impact that crisis centers have on the jail population, if you will?
Yeah, what we're hoping is that the jail will no longer be providing support and housing for individuals experiencing psychiatric crisis. What we see right now is there are individuals who are experiencing crisis in the community, and out of lack of other resources, they are lodged in the jail because of a crime that they commit that is indeed a crime, but it's really related to their mental health needs. So the Crisis Center will allow for that population that is experiencing behavioral health crisis to be able to, instead of going to jail and being incarcerated for their crime, to have an opportunity to engage in treatment. Right now, there's still a fair amount of people that land and end up being lodged and become adults in custody out of lack of other options. And this is also not exclusive to Benton County. This is a national problem that folks with behavioral health crisis are far overrepresented in the judicial system. So we're working to provide that alternative level of care for individuals who are experiencing crisis, really with the hope of being able to engage with the population before they commit the crime that is now landing them in jail. We really want to be able to provide that first point of contact with no wrong door approach. So the first time law enforcement has an interaction with this person, or when a family member sees something going sideways and recognizes the need for additional support, the crisis center is there to decrease the chance that they either commit the crime or commit a higher level crime in the future. I will stop for the sheriff.
Thank you, Danielle. I won't be nearly as articulate. Currently, I have 17 adults in custody tied to my facility that need mental health services from Danielle and her team. Some are at the state hospital, some are in my facility, but they require special treatment, special care. And it's a level of care that I feel more comfortable going to the crisis center and saying, I have this individual, they have a certain degree of needs as far as care goes, and knowing that I can hand them over to a group of professionals that will be able to address those needs much better than my staff. My staff does an amazing job, but it's time, and it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time to be able to work closely with these individuals when Danielle and her staff aren't there. And similarly, they can't be housed in a unit with other folks, so they tie up multiple beds at a time. And so therefore, my 40 bed jail could be at operational capacity at 20 beds. And so then we start turning people away. And so the crisis center is just going to be another resource for us where we can take folks and know that they'll get the level of care that they need.
Are there any other participants that would like to share any input there? Commissioner Ojero.
Yeah, I would like to weigh in and just say that there will always be a need for some beds in jail for people that have committed serious crimes that have mental health challenges. And part of what we want also in a new correctional facility is to have a specialized pod or area for people that do need to be incarcerated and also need that special level of care. And what we are anticipating with the crisis center, as Danielle said, is addressing the needs for people that have psychotic episodes before they commit a crime and before they, or if they've only committed some sort of a violation like public urination. So I think that we need to be clear that the crisis center is not a substitute for jail, and it won't solve all of our problems right away. It's going to take time for the crisis center to become that resource that really reduces the need for jail beds. It's not going to be overnight.
Thank you, Commissioner. Another question that we oftentimes get relates to the size of the jail. And I would like to pose this particular question to the sheriff, to Mitch, and to Nick. Feel free to all join in. But currently, I believe we have proposed a 120-bed jail. And there's many questions around why is that large of a jail necessary? And shouldn't we have a larger crisis center versus a smaller jail?
And I'll jump in here first. Thanks, Joe. This jail was built 46 years ago, and I started with the Corvallis Police Department in 1997, and it was too small. We had outgrown it. Some of the priorities of the community had changed, and the jail was too small then. It would close, folks would be released. We started a matrix program to release people because we just couldn't house the folks that needed to be released. 120-bed jail, you're building to the future. And you're going to do it right now as opposed to 46 years of investment. And if you want to take a tour of the jail, you're more than welcome. You'll see that it's held up like conduit. It's old, and it is outdated and antiquated. And I lost my train of thought, but I apologize. The jail's old, and so it just needs to be replaced. And then similarly, like we talked about earlier, Ari Basil Wagner from Gobi, Great Oregon Behavioral Health, she talks about the need for accountability and treatment, and there has to be a good balance there. Currently, the folks that are in the facility are in there for serious crimes. There's a belief that folks that can come into the jail for trespass or criminal mischief. Right now, those things, that doesn't happen. The people that are housed in the facility are housed there for serious crimes, and so as such, some of that accountability piece is missing. We're trying to launch a very robust pretrial release program so that we can be in touch with our community, make sure that they don't, fail to appear to go to court. But if they fail to appear, there's no accountability piece to it right now, and they aren't held accountable. And DA Harrelson can certainly chime in here at any point as well. I presented earlier to the commissioners. They know the folks that are in custody currently what the charges are. The facility just needs to be bigger for an accountability point. One, two, like Danielle and Commissioner Ojero said, there needs to be a pod where folks that need that special care, they can receive that. And then second, lastly, the pandemic has taught us all. I have to turn people away all the time because I just don't have a place for them. We don't have negative pressure cells. It's an old facility. And so somebody may show up with COVID and they need to get housed, but we may have to turn them away. And that's a very real reality that we face in that facility as well.
Nick, is there anything you would like to add regarding the assessment that was completed back in 2018, 2019, relative to the size of the jail that we would be proposing? And Mitch, feel free to join in on that as well.
Yeah, Mitch, do you want to go first, and then I'll finish up? You haven't had.
Yeah, I think regarding the 120 number, it would be helpful either for the sheriff or you, Nick, to talk a little bit about, the 120 beds it's not intended to be full all the time. In fact, almost never can that happen. And so it's when we say building capacity for the future, it's not saying you're trying to fill it up in the future, but it allows the system to function as it should. And so there always should be empty beds in order for the system to function. I think, Sheriff, if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, being at operational capacity, this is a phased-in, process. to just open up a 120 bed jail. I mean, the logistics of that, the hiring, everything that would go into that would be a pretty amazing feat. But to be at operational capacity, whatever we deem that is, right now I've got at December, for example, on average, we have 50 people in custody between Norcor, where we rent, Polk County, where we rent, and our facility. If pandemic numbers weren't involved, that number would probably be closer to 70, simply because I can't get the numbers up at Norcor, as John can speak to, because the courts aren't open. And so there's just not things that are going on right now where folks are being sentenced. And so as a result, overnight, I'm not saying it could happen, but I could be at 70 beds pretty quick in our facility. And then when you start talking about parole and probation and people in post-prison that maybe need to be sanctioned for a day or two or whatnot, I don't have the room for them currently. And then when you start talking about mental health clients in a separate pod and things like that, pretty soon you're getting up around 80 or 90 people pretty quick. And I'd love to say we can do that, but to increase the jail size, I have to be able to increase the employee numbers as well. And that doesn't happen overnight.
I'll just finish up by sharing the assessment does a really good job of explaining the modeling that went into the approximately 120 beds, and maybe it's 117 or maybe it's 121. So 120 isn't an absolute. But as the sheriff just said, our numbers right now, if it weren't for COVID, are 70, 75. And if you factor just in growth of the county over the next 20 years to 2040, we'll be at approximately 92 beds. And then if you remember, I made the comment about how we use cite and release now 2 to 3 times what is considered best practices. Well, if you bring that down to what is considered a good percentage, that also adds to your adults in custody. So all of those play into it in terms of the analysis that went into that modeling.
Thank you, Nick. I see some frustration coming in through the question and answers as it relates to the perception that we're dancing around the topic of neighborhood safety. So I'd like to pose a question surrounding neighborhood safety. In this particular case, it apparently comes from a Grand Oaks resident who is concerned about the release of adults in custody into the neighborhood, that area of the community. I would assume that same concern exists for any neighborhood that would be adjacent to a correctional facility. But Sheriff, could you elaborate on that a little bit and talk about the release of adults in custody and safety of neighborhoods surrounding correctional facilities?
Certainly. So the current facility is attached to the historic courthouse downtown. It's 1 block away from a historic neighborhood. It's across the street from the transit center, Central Park, our library, and a very vibrant downtown. And we don't see increased numbers when we release people from the facility. They find their way to whichever resource that they've been pointed to, or whatever direction they go when they're released from our facility. Some of them will go back to Lynn County, Albany. They go home. It can be any answer for many people. Moving the facility out west, again, folks aren't going to want to stick out west. They want to get downtown where the resources are. And that's the nice thing about this meeting and the Justice System Improvement Program. We can make it whatever we want it. And so if that means that we are out west and we give people rides to the crisis center, to Chance, to wherever it might be, then maybe we can facilitate that. I mean, we can dictate what this looks like in the end. Similarly, when the crisis center is up and running, now I have started instituting in the facility a release questionnaire to find out where they're going, what resources they have available to them. Do they need a ride, whatever they need. if we have the resource center open, we can facilitate transport from there to the resource center. And then from the resource center, they can get pointed in the right direction of where they need to go, what for the resources they might need. So as far as an uptick in crime, we release people daily from our facility, and we don't see a big number of that. You just don't see that. And John can, the district attorney can address that as well. His facility is right next to my facility, and there isn't some uptick in crime from folks we release.
Sheriff, you mentioned our current downtown location a couple of times. I noticed the Corvallis Advocate had an article today or editorial today, and their position was that we should be focusing these facilities downtown. I think it'd be a good opportunity right now for Mitch, Nick, to talk a little bit about the site selection process that we went through. And was downtown a consideration? If it was a consideration, why was it ruled out? And will any potential facilities be located in the downtown core?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. Downtown location was certainly part of the mix. And as I shared earlier, when we got to our top to 10 list, there were 5 downtown locations and 5 suburban locations. So I remember when we started the pre-design process that there were definitely thoughts that we were going to be able to potentially build a campus downtown. What we learned is it's extremely difficult and in fact impossible to get a sizable piece of property downtown that would accommodate the kind of justice system that we're contemplating, and even trying to put the pieces together in proximity to each other downtown proved impossible. We did contemplate building a multi-story correctional facility. The cost to operate a multi-story correctional facility adds about $2 million a year to the operating budget. So effectively, you're building a new facility every 20 years in current dollars just by operating a multi-story facility. And in fact, they, as you'll hear from Mitch Hine here, DLR Group, who is our pre-design consultant, they really don't align with best practices. If you were to tour a facility today, they're typically built in a mezzanine fashion where they do have 2 levels, but it's all in one open environment, so that a single observation post can see both levels. But that's not what would have been required downtown due to lack of space. We would have actually had floors, partitions, elevators, etc. And so now you start duplicating staff. There's probably other considerations that I haven't mentioned here. Mitch, you can certainly embellish, but ultimately the downtown just was not viable in terms of available land to purchase. We did find a potential site that was large enough for the courthouse, but that was as much as we could site downtown. Mitch,
that's pretty good. I think you outlined the main points. It came down to an operational thing. We looked at a lot of different options downtown. We looked at can we reuse the historic courthouse and put some component of the JSIP project in it, put a courthouse next to it. Really, the only piece of the program that could possibly fit in there is the district attorney. And even with that, putting a new courthouse next to it on that historic green still doesn't quite fit. And so you need quite a bit of space to make the modern courthouse function just as is. Pairing that with the correctional facility, Nick, you said it exactly right. The multi-story housing causes the operational cost to go up so much that it really doesn't seem like a good use of the taxpayer money year after year to make a decision to go after that. When the alternative is you can find a piece of land that can have to be able to accommodate all of these things in a modern way that is operationally effective and can be the best use of that money.
Any other panelists that would like to join in on that answer? One of the questions that I see relates to the urban growth boundary. And I think it would be helpful, Mitch, for you, while you have the floor, to talk a little bit about the urban growth boundary. What does that mean? And why do facilities like this need to be sited either in or adjacent to an urban growth boundary?
So when we first, we cast a really wide net looking for sites first, and one of the first elimination points was if it was outside the urban growth boundary. When we were approaching this project, it was something that we talked about. Does the courthouse need to be in Corvallis? Does the seat need to be inside the city? And the decision was made that yes, it's appropriate for that to happen. And so for something to be located immediately outside of the urban growth boundary, from a urban design standpoint, is a little bit. The point of it is to densify and be building inside of that city. So you don't want to be picking something that's right outside of it if you decide to go that way. And so locating all of these civic structures, the civic project outside of the urban area, didn't seem quite appropriate. Within the city, you have a city limit and then the urban growth boundary. So the city limit isn't all the way up to that urban growth boundary. And some of the sites that we were looking at could have possibly needed to be annexed inside of the city. So we're still looking at kind of anything that was available within that urban growth boundary to keep it within the seat of Corvallis, and keep the density close to where the people are for those civic amenities.
Thank you, Mitch. Any other panelists that would like to weigh in on that? So, commissioners, I'm going to turn my attention to a couple of questions that I think pertain to your area of interest, and it relates to the upcoming bond election that we have planned in May of 2023. And the question is, will the Crisis Center, courthouse, law enforcement building, and correctional facility be voted on as one bond measure, or will they be voted on separately if you are in favor of one and opposed to another?
I could take that, unless one of either Pat or Nancy. We have not made that decision yet, is the long and short of it. And we're not going to make that decision for a few months until we have the site selected and really do that hard look at what it all is going to look like in terms of the preliminary design and have those cost estimates. Commissioner Malone?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Part of the question was, are we going to vote on these one at a time? And I think that's a no. But it's not, at this point, it's not clear exactly what the package would be. Nick referenced her early on, trying to get the cost down to a reasonable amount, and I think that's a laudable goal. We are looking for partners for helping fund. Well, we've got a couple already. Courthouse has been mentioned, and some dollars for the respite center, but there may be other opportunities to find matching dollars to get the cost down. But at this point, it's trying to make a package that makes the most sense for advancing the project forward.
And I'll just chime in and say that I think my fellow commissioners have summed that up well. Our decision tomorrow is really based on site. It's a site selection decision. There will be many decisions to come after that, along with multiple rounds of public engagement.
Thank you, Commissioners. There's a question that came in relative to the correctional facility and whether or not we intend for any new correctional facility to be a profit center, if you will, in terms of renting or leasing out any excess beds to other jurisdictions. Is that one of our priorities? And I would pose that to the Commissioners as well as to Sheriff Van Arsdal.
I would say that in really preliminary discussions, when we were doing the criminal justice systems assessment, there was interest from adjacent counties if we do have specialized capacity with respect to mental health beds for in our correctional facility. That has not been pursued further. We don't have a site. We don't have specific concrete proposal about what that facility is going to look like in terms of design yet. But I can say I did see the question about whether this would be a for-profit facility. And as a commissioner, I say, no, absolutely not. We would never be looking for a contractor to run this as a for-profit facility.
Yeah, just to follow up the question. It's to me, it's a kind of an original question. We have not had any discussion about that I can remember renting beds, or I do remember the discussion a year ago that Zan just referenced to more of a regional facility, but have not heard any further discussion on that. And I think that's. I wouldn't think that that's part of the plan. We're building a facility to meet Benton County's needs.
Thank you. Nick, I'm going to initially direct the next question to you, and it's really specific to the north site. The question is, can you speak specifically to the north site plan? You shared a site plan for the west site, but not the north. The cost of the north site is a minimal upfront investment compared to the negative long-term community impact at the west site.
Well, I think I shared test fits for both. I don't think that's the answer to the question. The upfront cost, well, as I've said, the upfront cost is not insignificant. And, I'm struggling here because I don't know quite what the questioner is saying relative to long-term cost on the west side or any other site versus the north site. Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry. I don't know if they can provide a little bit more information.
So Nick, maybe you could provide some information regarding the anticipated infrastructure costs associated with the north site. We get a lot of questions regarding the west site as it relates to 53rd and traffic impacts there. Can you talk about any proposed infrastructure improvements relative to Highway 20? When people talk about, there's the initial investment of purchasing the property, that's just one aspect of it. The other aspect of it are all of the associated development costs associated with a particular property as it relates to the transportation infrastructure and utilities. Can you speak more specifically to what the north site might require relative to improvements in infrastructure?
Sure. Well, there's a known development cost of about $1 million on the north site. There's a Corvallis, City of Corvallis transportation system plan, collector road that goes through the site and all from 20 all the way back to some point on Circle. And we would be responsible for the portion of it that crosses the property we're proposing to purchase. As I shared, there's a left turn lane maybe that would be required by ODOT. We've already met with ODOT, and traffic signal is not warranted, so that would be not be part of the mix. Utilities are in very close proximity, because of the Hewlett-Packard campus, so that's not really a consideration. And long-term operational expenses on either west or north are good, because there's not a lot of considerations. They both have ample space, which is important. They have room for growth, which is important. So kind of similar in that regard.
While we're on the topic of infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion about the 53rd Street trestle and the proposed overpass in the future. And is that cost of that particular project being taken into consideration when we look at the development costs associated with the west site location? And if we're not taking it into consideration, why? And also any information as it relates to the potential cost of that overpass project.
Yeah, I mean, the potential cost, I think, is above $10 million. I think the last number I heard from Laurel Byer, our traffic engineer, was 12 million. It's not a requisite piece for the Justice System campus, so that's why it's not part of the development analysis. It is a very needed project in the county, and so it's not to say that it isn't important. It's not to say that it isn't a priority, but the impacts that are necessitating it are there now, and those impacts are going to be highly magnified by, or going to be magnified by that Mary's annexation development, which has potentially as many as 1,000 units, which is just dwarfs what is the impact of JSIP. So that's why it's not considered a requisite piece for development of the west site. I've said in previous meetings that infrastructure improvements could, though, always be part of the bond measure package. So that's not to say there couldn't be money for transportation improvements around any proposed site, but I want to differentiate that from saying they're requisite relative to the proposed development and impact.
Thank you. I'd like to engage DA Haraldson and the sheriff here for a moment. And there is a question that asks, aren't most of the crimes, isn't downtown having most of the crimes now, is the specific question. So can you speak to the type of crimes that are being experienced both downtown, west side, north side, throughout the community? And DA Haraldson, I know you have a great handle on the types of crimes that are committed. And so maybe you could speak to that question as well in terms of the type of adults in custody we have in our current jail.
That's what happens when you click the wrong button. So thank you, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll try to be brief, folks, so that you can get more questions in. I would note that I have been reading the participant comments, and I understand that you're not able to access the participant number count. There's 114 that I can see on my screen in the participant count. And then, of course, there are an additional attendees are 100, and panelists are 14. So in either case, with regards to the number of crimes that occur in downtown, that's a little bit challenging to quantify for this reason. There are different types of crimes that occur across our county. And so if you want to talk about crimes that involve, let's say, disorderly conduct, criminal mischief, thefts that are occurring perhaps in the downtown area, that may be different than if we're talking about crimes that involve extreme violence or homicide. And so with regards to the downtown area, that is not what I would describe as an area that, by the nature of it being downtown, we see a higher number of serious violent crimes taking place there. At the end of the day, the variables that come into play could impact a wide range of areas in our community. With respect to the jail, I would just say briefly that our jail is so small that we are only able to hold the most serious offenders or folks who have failed to appear so many times that the court is prepared to hold those individuals. It's big. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge that I think speaks to the issue of, one, do we need new facilities? If you don't believe that we need new facilities, then we really don't get to the second question. If you do believe we need new facilities, then the question goes to the location. Where do we put those facilities? And as district attorney, my role is really to use the resources that are provided to me by the people of our jurisdiction. And that's why it's important for us to be able to hear from you. Encourage you to put those your feedback in the chat, in the Q&A. I will promise you I will read each and every one.
Sheriff, is there any additional information you'd like to provide?
No, I think District Attorney Harrelson did a good job.
Commissioners, I'd like to go back to you and give each one of you the opportunity to discuss a little bit more about the criteria that you are taking into consideration as you are deliberating on what site the county should be selecting. And I know you've, done this at previous meetings, but I think it's important for the participants here to understand where each of you are coming from. And as you're sharing that, if you can also comment on why are we rushing a decision? Commissioner Malone.
Well, maybe I'll take the last one first. From Nick's timetable, we've been at this for over 4 years and trying to engage the community in conversations and figuring out what we need. Back in 2018, 2019, Ari Basil-Wagner town halls that I thought were very helpful getting this project going. And as far as site selection, we've been at this at least a year and a half, and have gone through a fairly extensive search with professional help. My criteria for picking a site is going back to the matrix. What can we put on that site initially? Does it have room for expansion? There's the initial cost, but then, like was mentioned, with the two-story correctional facility, extremely high operating costs that are with you as long as you have that facility. And so that, and I think Lincoln County ran into that issue. I think they have a 3-story downtown facility, and our son-in-law was deputy with Lincoln County, and I know at times the upper floors were closed. Just they didn't have the staffing, didn't have the funding to keep it open. And obviously, community support is important as this kind of long-term project has moved forward. So I think that's, I may have left something out, but those are the high points of, well, I guess just going back to the matrix that Nick shared, and the north side has come out ahead. We've had various scorings, but it has shown to be a superior site, and so we will take it from there, I guess. Thank you.
Commissioner Osro.
I'll address the issue of whether we're rushing into this or not first. As Commissioner Malone said, we've been at this for quite a while. We have tried to engage the community as much as possible. In the earlier technical aspects of the decision, we had the community advisory group and the technical advisory group working with us, and then a whole series of community meetings starting in June of this year. And one of the things I want to point out is that it's a difficult time. With COVID, it makes it even harder. We have a hard time getting the word out. And it's difficult until the shoe pinches, right? So until the jail is in your backyard, until you have something to react to, it's hard to get people's attention on this kind of an issue. So I want to say thank you, first of all, to all of you who have been so engaged, because it's helping us get the word out. We want everyone to be as educated as possible on what we're proposing when it comes time for the bond measure. So my criteria, operational efficiency and functionality are key, which is why we voted on the board for a campus approach. It will reduce our annual operating costs significantly to have all of the facilities in one location. It has to be functional for the sheriff's office, for the other law enforcement agencies in terms of where the correctional facility is located, and for the courts and the DA, and for all of the community residents who need to use the facilities for various purposes. Cost is clearly a factor. And it's very difficult to weigh costs between the sites. Yes, the dollar cost is really important. Yes, we can use some of the north cost site as match for the state courthouse expense. So there are ways to cut and slice and dice it different ways. But we want to make sure that we minimize those upfront costs to the best of our ability, and that we minimize those operating costs over time. Community support is very important. We can't pass a bond measure without you. And of course, one of the things that is always important to me is how the site we choose affects the trajectory of land use in that particular area over the long term. And that's an issue that concerns me about the west site, because as many of you have pointed out, Bald Hill is a crown jewel of our natural areas. There's a lot of natural area property ownership, Greenbelt Land Trust, the county's lands as well. The fairgrounds are there, OSU's ag lands. And is that really the right place for a civic node? Perhaps, perhaps not. The north site is, to my mind, a much more appropriate site in light of that future development trajectory, and keeping all of our civic functions close to the downtown core. So those are my considerations as I make my site decision.
Thank you. Commissioner Wise, would you like to share your perspective as well?
Yes, thank you, Joe. And I'll just quickly mention, Zan and Pat did a good job at addressing the notion of our process being rushed. And I do understand how that can come across from some people's perspectives. I do just want to highlight the fact that, in this process, many people asked us to slow down multiple times, and we did. Multiple people asked us, called on us. Many of you demanded that we readdress the north site. And Nick Hirth did that. I was skeptical that it was going to be possible, and Nick worked tirelessly to get that back on the table. So all my thanks goes to Nick for doing that. Thank you, Nick. And I will speak a little to my site selection. My main criteria, number 1 is community support. Number 2, upfront costs. Number 3, long-term costs. Number 4, hurdles in the process. And number 5, law enforcement's accessibility to other locations. Those are my main criteria. Other criteria that I'm considering at a high level view would be future expansion possibility, flooding concerns, travel time and proximity to downtown, best practice factors, efficiency, quality, traffic concerns. And finally, I like to keep in mind our JSIP vision, which is the residents of Benton County require an effective, efficient, and equitable criminal justice system that maintains public safety and holds people accountable, while providing treatment opportunities that address underlying causes of criminal behavior. And that is why we are all here. And I thank everybody who is here and participating. I really appreciate you.
Thank you to our panelists this evening, and I recognize that we can't get through all of the questions that have been presented. We've tried to get through as many as we could and give the panelists ample time to provide responses. Nick, there are a couple of logistical questions that I'd like to clear up with you and then have you close out. There's some, I think, some perception that we have limited the participation tonight to 100 people. So could you please address that? And could you also share why we went with the format tonight as opposed to the format that we did with people entering questions and questions as opposed to being able to verbally express their own question?
Sure. Well, I see we currently have 108 participants. I think that number was higher earlier. We actually purchased a Zoom account with capacity for 500 tonight. So there was certainly no objective to limit the capacity. And I think, as I said, we had more than 100 or up to 120 participants. The second part of your question,
it really gets to the format.
Yeah, the format. Yep. It's very well. Let's just admit it. All of this is suboptimal. We'd much prefer to be in a room together. I know I would. I know Joe would. I think every one of the panelists would. Unfortunately, it's not safe to do that yet. When you have in excess of even like 20 to 25 participants, it gets really difficult to run the meeting and have people speaking out of turn. I think many of you have probably been in meetings with just a handful of people, and it takes a lot of concentration, even when you know each other, and kind of so it's just honestly to conduct a meeting with this many people, really the only way to do it is the way we've done it tonight. The county certainly isn't an expert at it. There's probably better ways that maybe we're not aware of, but we're certainly giving it our all and trying to do the best we can with our resources. So I just want to acknowledge it is suboptimal, but we're trying to do the best we can with it.
Nick, how can participants get more information regarding the Justice Systems Improvement Program?
Yeah, there's several sources. So, my door is always open. I think at the outset of the meeting, the My contact information, the meeting and the microsite information was put into the chat, and it was also part of the presentation. Certainly the microsite has information there. We're always trying to update it. We're not always on top of that, again, for lack of resources, but we try. There will be, many additional opportunities for public engagement. And so that's kind of one of the exciting things looking forward. And not only relative to pre-design, which is the phase that we're in right now, but also the design phase. So, keep in mind, we're looking at concepts here, trying to figure out a bond package, but then we're also going to start moving into design. And so there'll be public engagement for that. So relative to, certainly relative to the new courthouse, potentially for the crisis center. And then if the bond passes and we have additional facilities, each of those will enter into design phase. So we're anticipating at least, 2 major pushes in the coming year relative to public engagement. One hopefully occurring before summer, the second one occurring in the fall. So we look forward to more of these meetings, and hopefully they'll be in person at some point.
Thank you, Nick. Nick, I'd like you to go ahead and prepare to close out the meeting, and maybe you could do that by describing what the next steps are for the Board of Commissioners.
Well, the major next step is to make a site selection decision, hopefully tomorrow at tomorrow morning's meeting at 9. Once we have a site, there's a number of activities that I'm working on. We are moving into design for the new courthouse. We're really moving into design relative to the crisis center. We'll be bringing on additional resources to help us with public engagement. And so I think those are, kind of the major next steps. And then starting to kind of hone what are the elements leading up to a bond measure and looking at trade-offs. I think the final piece is also just continuing to pursue the major funding opportunities that we have underway, and see how that affects the bond package as well.
Thank you, Nick. I'd like to thank our panelists this evening for spending time providing additional information regarding our program. Commissioner Ojro, you wanted to interject.
Yes, thank you. I just am seeing in the chat that there's interest in tomorrow's meeting and how people can watch it. You can find information on that at our website, and look under Board of Commissioners, and that meeting should be posted in our calendar. And I'm assuming that, as usual, it will be on Facebook Live.
Commissioner, I can't confirm that right now, but I can definitely acknowledge that we are using the GoToMeeting platform. It is a virtual meeting, and it is a public meeting, and the public is welcome and encouraged to attend virtually via our GoToMeeting link. Okay, Nick, with that, I'm turning it back over to you to officially close out the meeting.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I do welcome your questions. I try to get to them as quickly as I can, as do the commissioners. We look forward to seeing any of you that wish to join tomorrow. There will be time for public comment. And, we're looking forward to working with you. We have another year's worth of work ahead of us. And so we invite your participation, and thank you tonight as well. Good night.
Thank you.
Record.